Welcome to our 27th podcast. Today we'll be talking about the impact of change on organizational culture. What's one thing you can do now to ensure you're keeping the culture that you want, or become the culture that you want to be? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. As always, we're so glad to have you here. My name is Rich Cruz. I'm an organizational development consultant, and we are joined today by my co-host, Ben Kleinman. Hi, Ben.
Hey, everyone.
And Cheryl Volpe.
Hi, everyone.
And we are going to talk today about the impact of change on organizational culture. So, I think probably the first place to start here was like a few episodes ago, we talked about the concept of the ship of Theseus, right? This myth. Anybody want to recap that real quick? Or are you going to leave that up to me?
You're on a roll.
Oh, I am.
I'll give it a stab. I think what we wound up resolving to is there's this paradox of if you change things so much and every little bit gets changed, at what point does the original thing still exist? And so it was this idea, the paradox for the ship of Theseus was this plank by plank, they rebuilt the whole ship. Is it still Theseus's ship? And you had these philosophers arguing about that, discussing it for hundreds of years. But for our purposes, if you change things within an organization or within a culture, bit by bit by bit, at what point do you lose that culture? And is it still the same organization? So we had a lot of fun talking about that, coming up with our usual brilliance and innovative insights.
Wow, we are not short of humility today.
Great job, Ben.
Awesome.
Why, we admit both of you.
So,
I'm just riding coattails.
This, I don't know, man.
So I think where we're trying to go today is say, okay, we've talked a little bit about this idea that you have a culture,
right,
whatever it is, good or bad, parts good, parts bad, whatever. But at some point, you may want to either say, this is what we want to be, and let's keep it, or we want to change it, so let's change it. How do you do that while still staying true to whatever it is you're going to? If you want to keep it, how do you keep it without completely becoming something else?
Yeah.
And you don't want to keep it if you want to evolve it to something better for you, for your people, for your organization, for your industry. How do you do that in a way that's true and authentic to you as an organization?
Right. Especially if you have built a reputation of integrity, trust, success. The stakes on change are so high at that point. I mean, if your company is already failing or you know that you're doing something wrong, then that kind of change is called innovation and progress. But when it's a company with a legacy, refresh, but a company with a legacy on past values, it gets trickier.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe one of the things we should start with is to kind of define, and we've done this in other episodes, but for newer listeners, can we define what organizational culture means to you?
Sure. In fact, our last episode, we talked about institutional knowledge, institutional memory, and that is also distinctly different from what we're talking about today, right? Those things are a part of culture, just about everything is under the umbrella of culture, either written or unwritten. And
Sure.
that culture is what drives the motivation of the people in that environment. It's the air around you. It's the decorum. It's the unspoken expectations. It's what makes you proud to work there. It is that reputation, personality of an organization, right?
Sure.
Those are the things that it represents to me.
That makes sense. For me, I think of, so there's Edgar Schein's model, right? Of, if you imagine either a triangle or a pyramid or the iceberg, right? Where you have this top part.
Right.
There's the overall assumptions of the group, right? Then there's the espoused values based on those assumptions, and that top little part that's the part that the ship is going to that the ship sees, but it doesn't see everything else underneath it, right? That's the artifacts, right? That's the outward signs, symbols, behaviors, norms. It's the slogans and the way that we do things. So it's those norms. So I think of it as culture being those signs and symbols and norms of behavior, the rituals. So
Right. Yeah. That's great. Right.
Yeah, I think that one thing I guess step back. There was a really nice quote I heard, and it was attributed to Lieutenant General from the USMC, the U.S. Marine Corps, George Flynn, who said, "Culture equals values plus behavior." And I think that's, for me anyways, it summed it up kind of nicely. You have values. If you act on those, and if they're the right values, and you act on them in the right way, that becomes a very positive kind of work culture. Can have the negative as well. Of course, their behaviors are not enforced or reinforced, then your values don't mean much. But in a nutshell, I think that seemed to resonate with me.
Yeah.
Very simple, elegant way to say it, for sure.
But I think what I like is that we're all saying very similar things in slightly different ways and using different words and models and things like that. But I think it helps people kind of wrap their minds around what we're talking about when we say org culture.
Right. So when we have a change then that's happening within an organization, whether that's procedures, policies, whether that's mergers and acquisitions or tech disruptions or whatever, we've talked about the different levels of emotions, the behaviors of people in general. That we've got the early adopters versus the late adopters versus the laggards. In that adoption of the change, change resistance. How does that affect that culture that's been, on the positive and negative side? How does that, that change have an impact on that culture? And that's what we're here to talk about today.
Great setup. Well, as usual, communication and leadership, right? If that change is not communicated, especially if it represents a cultural change, the transparency is critical to the extent that leaders can be, right? There's, going back to the iceberg or pyramid, picture there, Rich, there is always a certain amount of information that might be under the surface for leadership. But the intention to share everything that could be vital to the change with the employees, that intention to share and that openness is critical, especially, you guys know that, someone very close to me is going through an epic change where they work, and it's been fascinating to watch how the, top leadership is handling that communication. And, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but the effort has to be made.
Sure. Yep. And when there's, we've talked about that, clarifying, the goals of what, the why we're doing change, that we've been saying that since the beginning, right? But when you are changing how we're doing things normally, right? I'm looking over here at the show notes that you put in here, Cheryl, like this disruption of norms, the shift in values that could be happening, right? With like new ownership, that I've seen that specifically, the impact of morale, because there's this lack of trust. There's this lack of, I don't want to let go of the past.
Yep.
And then there's the, the whole, over communication, under communication struggles that happen there too. So all of that really, affects the way that we work, as a group, right? So that culture is just in turmoil.
I think we've talked about it before on prior episodes, but I feel like we've come to the conclusion that change is normally seen with some level of resistance, that's just a natural tendency that humans have, that we've evolved to have, this sort of resistance to change, or at least hesitancy to change. And that there can often be, even if we know it's going to be a great thing, we're replacing an old IT system that everyone hates, we're getting a new one, it's going to be awesome. There's still a sense of, I'm going to have to change how I do my daily. I'm going to have to learn a whole bunch of new things. I don't know if I want to. It's like, not sure. There's always that resistance to it. And I feel like maybe that's where, if you have a strong culture that is, Cheryl, I'm going to steal your thunder, that is very psychologically safe and supportive. We have that supportive psychological beanbag behind each of us. That's a place where you can try things and you can roll things out, and you have a little bit of that grace or cushion built into that culture to where it's going to go a lot easier, a lot smoother than if the culture is one where change is just forced upon, or people's concerns are not addressed, or there's no co-creation, people's ideas are not taken into account, things like that.
Absolutely. And when a little bit later in the show, there are a couple of ideas around how to preserve that level of psychological safety to make that kind of change as easy as possible. But it is right up there with transparency. Transparency is a key part of that safety. But the oversharing, of course, sometimes leadership will share something that will just cause any psychological safety to evaporate, like atmosphere on like the moon.
Sure.
Right.
I love that visual.
Yeah.
All your positive intentions just evaporating, like mist in the sun.
I'm sure my son would have every correction to make on it, because I think there is a bit of some kind of atmosphere on the moon, but we should, I'm going to stop right there.
Yeah, we don't want to go with that. Cool. All right. Well, I think maybe let's take our first break. And then when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. See you in a second.
For Fortune 100 companies and small businesses alike, Harborside Strategy helps design and implement customized precision change management initiatives. From new organizational structures to new processes to new systems, we help you clarify the reason and urgency around your change in language that will resonate across your organization. With that clarity and a common purpose, we use the power of stories and blended communication methods to reinforce your goals and keep everyone focused and aligned. All of it tailored to your people, your organization, your needs. Contact Principal Ben Kleinman today to learn more at www.harborsidestrategy.com. Again, that is www.harborsidestrategy.com.
And we're back. So we've been talking about the impact of change on organizational culture, right? So we started off with kind of defining culture and then talking about some of the, how, change disrupts all of that. So we're going to want to take this next.
I would love to talk about some things that leaders can do when they see that change coming down. In fact, the elephant in the room is AI, right? And Ben, you just posted a great paper about implementing changes that are bundled with that advent into the environment, into the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we all kind of put it together, and it was just a way to summarize a lot of the thinking that regular listeners are going to recognize that we talk about quite often. Just pretty standard stuff, and looking at AI in light of not thinking about it as this revolutionary thing, but it is just another type of change that you might implement. And if you have all of the underlying sort of time-tested, battle-tested strategies in place, it can go a lot smoother. And it doesn't matter that the technology is so revolutionary.
Right.
Well, and I don't want to discount though that you said it's pretty standard stuff. I mean, it's the thing is, if it was pretty standard stuff and we could just kind of follow a blueprint and just kind of make it happen over and over again, people would be doing that all the time, and everything would be a snap. And culture is never at a risk, right? But that doesn't really seem to be the case, does it?
You're so right, and thank you for not being humble about that. I think what we've talked about on many of our shows and what we've posted on our blogs is so important, because at least in my experience, this does not always go smoothly and is not always well thought through, and it is not something that your average employee takes to very easily. That there are so many moving parts and there's so many nuances to doing it well, and that's where it's helpful to have people kind of looking over your shoulder or helping out like us that can make those things go just a little bit smoother.
Yeah. Well, something that comes to mind for me, if I can relate a story about this, right? So recently I've been working with a law firm, right? And it's interesting how quickly cultures can develop or even subcultures, let's even call it that, right? So there's, a way that a certain group of people might operate, right? So there was this new software that they put in. The idea was everybody's supposed to be using this software, but this small group of people started using it in a different way that they were more comfortable with. And subsequently, they changed some of the nuances of how it worked, and it actually kind of broke some elements of the software, right? Which then you had a bunch of other people in the organization go, why isn't this working the way that it's supposed to, and all that stuff, So every time that they would, the IT department would come in and change it back to where it was, there was this feeling of ownership by the kind of leader of this subgroup, right? Of, don't touch my stuff. Like I made this change. Don't touch my stuff. This is the way that our little hub operates, right? And would continuously revert that back. And it actually cost the company a significant amount of money, because they would keep having to come in and go, oh, there must be a bug. Why does this keep changing? And they, it was really, no, there's a subculture here that happened of, we liked it this way, and we're going to keep going on that route. So I guess all that's to say is that sometimes those late adopters, the resistors, so to speak, of change, who fear the loss of something that they've built, or even something that they've just wrapped themselves in like a warm blanket, can really bring some strong emotions and keep them from, being part of the overall vision of that new culture.
You were going to use enculturated. Just use it. It's a great word.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just it. They don't want to become all those norms, those behaviors, the signs, symbols that we're trying to enculturate, right? They are vehemently, or I can't even say vehemently. Like sometimes it's not even a conscious thing. Like they just resist it.
Was there something about that change that the small group wanted and kept going back to? Was that discussed in terms of, was it useful for them in a way that didn't harm the rest of the organization? Did it make that group more productive? Or was it just a vestige that they were clinging on to that really corrupted everything else for the rest of the organization?
So in this case, it was purely I didn't understand how this worked, so I'm going to eliminate some steps, right? And instead of, so it may have been, we felt that it was more complex than it needed to be, and we went that route, right? Parsimony is not always the answer, but sometimes it is, right? But I have seen that work where some kind of change has been made, but it, maybe in like a test state or something like that. And this group is, I have this idea and I'm going to prototype this, but that's not what happened here, right? What happened here was we were having a established system, literally just invested in the system, and then we didn't like the way that this works, so we're going to change it kind of back to a stage that we want.
There's at least 3 other episodes, and what you're saying, Rich, right? There's innovation, there's the fail fast, there's psychological safety and making a suggestion that is different than the way we're being trained. There's the idea that their way might in fact have been better. Maybe the software company needs an email. Hey, did you think of this? I mean, I've been in companies. The most recent was my last. And we had a writing software that the team that created that software took suggestions from us because, the person running our company had a vision to make it even more efficient for his specific purpose. And that company was open to changing it for us. It was great. That was probably on the rare side. Obviously, if you're purchasing institutionally tested software and spent that money, you can't really change it. And those folks probably just need to get on the train. But there's all those other things too.
Yeah.
Was there a culture? I'm hearing that there might be a culture of comfort with change, Cheryl, and safety in suggesting ways to do change a little bit better or a little bit co-changey at that organization that Rich maybe wasn't quite as instantiated at the place you were talking
Sure. And a lot of hubris, might I add, when you think that you can call the software company and say, so on the rare side, but going.
It depends. I mean, I think a lot of people get very afraid of calling whoever their vendor is and saying, we need something a certain way. Now, if you're a small shop and you're calling Salesforce, chances are that's not going to go well, but you have to be able to work within your confines.
Right.
And still, it's okay to say this needs to be done, if it's not right off the shelf stuff, especially if someone's making it for you custom, you can advocate for positive changes.
Right. So
I will say from personal experience in Salesforce, I've been in several Salesforce specific rollouts, right? Salesforce does have a method to report, changes that you would want to see in future iterations of the software, right? So it's kind of an idea board, and so small businesses, big businesses, whatever, can put those in there. Now, that having been said, Salesforce has a reputation of, and kind of a business built on, completely changing the culture within the organization with that rollout. You are expected to know their nomenclature,
For client organizations, not
for
Salesforce culture is its own thing. That's not changing. But when company A decides to go from software X to Salesforce,
be prepared.
Be expected to change their culture.
Yeah. And
that client
and Salesforce has that reputation, right? That's what that is its culture. It is recognizable, right? It has just been so successful with that people are like, all right, bring it on. We have just brought this into it is in the room with us now, right?
Absolutely.
So going back to that idea of culture and change, I want to ask you another question about the story you shared with us, Rich. Was there any advocates for or against the person who thought of their own way, or to go back to the way the software needs to work? Because finding advocates within subgroups, micro environments, microcultures within the larger culture can be good for change, and they can also make change even less successful. It depends. If leaders, for example, can identify the people in the subgroups, in the micro environments that are advocates for the change, have seen the value of the change, have become good at the change, have been trained in the change to make it a soft.
And believe in the change themselves.
Yes, yeah. Belief.
I think a lot of times we see people get identified and they're kind of half-hearted, or there's the same person gets identified for change after change and they're just burned out.
That too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to interrupt. These are so good.
But you're right about the belief has to be palpable and not BS.
Right. Yep. Before I answer that, because I really want to answer that, let's take another quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about some of the advocacy and getting people on board with that change. So we'll be right back.
Are you struggling with high employee turnover, low morale, or poor communication within your team? Do you find it challenging to foster collaboration and trust among your employees? Do you have resistance to some of the recent changes you've made in your business? You're not alone. According to sources such as Forbes and the Society for Human Resources Management, many business owners face these same challenges. They know that success comes from a strong workplace culture, but they don't always know where to start. If this sounds like you, it's time to take action. Our experienced consultants stand ready to work with you to develop customized solutions. Don't wait any longer. Take our quick culture scorecard today and discover where you can improve. Work Balance Consulting, where workplace culture meets success. Visit our website at www.workbalanceconsulting.com/scorecard and start your journey toward a better workplace today. Again, visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com/scorecard.
And we're back. So, Cheryl, can you reiterate that question again? I was just relating a story about some resistance to some of the changes based on somebody wanting it, kind of having a subculture of this is how we do things.
Sure. In the example you gave, the subculture was an individual or a group of individuals who found a way to use the software that represented the change in a way that still made it functional, but maybe not as functional or efficient or the right way, air quotes. And my question to you was, did the person or group that was using it the less than correct way have advocates outside of their subgroup that inspired their rebellious way, or were there other advocates who said, this is not sustainable, guys. You need to do it the right way. Were there other people outside of the people you're talking about that influenced how that was going to go?
Yeah. So on both sides. Okay. So we had, on the kind of subculture side, the one that had the kind of negative influence. Yes, there was a kind of a, well, let me put it this way. So if we look at John Cotter's model, right, of change, right, there's this element of getting a coalition, a guiding coalition together, right? So people who are aligned to why we need to make this urgent change. So what happened here is you had a bunch of people who were very uncomfortable with this new software and were very comfortable with basically how they were doing things more or less on paper and with spreadsheets. And it was, we're going to make this as spreadsheet-like as possible and revert back to, where we were in that comfort zone, right?
Everyone has been there. That is like every change story starts with people wanting to keep their spreadsheets or something similar. There's an analog. So your story is going to resonate with like 99% of the population.
Well, I hope so. I've been there too, but then there's this. There was a guiding coalition that was definitely more formal because it came from the top, right? So we had the business owner specifically who said, "Okay, hold on, we need to invest in this kind of enterprise level software, right? That's to take us to the next level. It's to add value to the organization. It is going to allow us to have a better workflow." And there was this kind of guiding coalition that was put together there with some of the other more senior people, and then with the external consultants, and I ended up being one of those that came in, right? So there was some of that coalition that came together there. Alan Landers, who's kind of like my mentor in organizational development and change leadership from the Drucker School, he puts together this thing called a PIT. Oh. Planning and Implementation Team.
It can't possibly be our first acronym, but
I was just going to say.
I don't remember you highlighting any others. Is it possible this late?
30 odd minutes into it. First acronym.
Oh, we're in. Yeah. Okay. Well, there we go. So
we go.
So this, we could breathe a sigh of relief. Our culture is preserved.
I was fearing that change. I'm like, it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. But this planning and implementation team that really was a lot more formalized, so it was actually in the broader or larger culture, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it had that I think there's a difference is that it had the main stakeholder support.
Yes.
Right. And so it became
at the top. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So there's different levels of power. I think we've talked about that before in some other episodes, but inherent power. I know that's not the
implied.
The actual given power of the business owner, right, over maybe that social referent power that was within that small,
Right. So, the reason ownership is always, 51-49.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So that has been able to move this in that positive direction. More, there is something that actually came out of this in the very recent past, as the admin, any admin privileges for anybody in that group were revoked.
Oh, wow.
Like you can't make these changes anymore, you know.
Oh, wow.
And everybody had to kind of go through some retraining because we had to put the system back in the right path, right? So it got reset up, and then everybody had to go back through some training.
God, just the opposite.
That's a hard stop.
Hard stop, and
Looking for glitches like that.
the opposite of a reward system.
Well, there's positive rewards,
Negative outcome.
negative rewards.
That's the truth. And it's the opportunity to not have that happen was presented, and that opportunity was not taken. Right. This was sort of a repeat offense, and it just became, and that can be costly every time you have to get the IT guy in there to reset things. It's just comes down to dollars and cents at that point.
Right. And Richard, I think you had said that it became a very financially costly thing, not just in terms of culture and all of that, but
Sure. Which is, that's where good change management comes into play, doesn't it? It helps to relieve some of those risks.
Absolutely.
Yep.
and that's why people should hire you.
And you.
And me.
You.
Great way to bring it back.
I was just thinking both of you. Yes.
We'd be lost without you. So
That's right.
have we talked about the impact of change on culture? I think we have. And I think that there's a new word I would like to introduce that goes back to my original definition of culture. It was introduced to me by my niece, who is a very wonderful, thriving person in New York City. Can't begin to talk about all that she has accomplished for climate and science and all of it. But she taught me this word. It's called interstitium. Interstitium. It's all that space in your body, inside your body, between all the organs and everything else.
Okay.
And that is an excellent way to explain a culture within an organization also.
It's all the interstitial stuff.
Yeah, interstitium. It's such a direct word for interstitial stuff, right? So that's my word for the day, and I did want to circle back to that. The interstitial stuff is the culture, and without it, there's a lot of empty space inside the body and within a company, and it happens naturally too. Like you were saying earlier, too, Rich. There's a lot of organic developments. Culture can form, subcultures can form very quickly.
Yeah.
And so and because of that, leaders that have that open door policy, that transparency, that communication model can take advantage of that rapid formation in a good way in their culture.
For sure. Yep. Awesome. So we are just about up here at time or so. What's a takeaway that you have for the audience for today?
Cupboards.
There's going to be a lot of editing on this part. We're all very quiet.
Considered thoughtfulness. How about that? No, I think in terms of our podcast today, it goes back to so many of the things that we've talked about before, and just recognizing that change can be a disruption, and it can be intentional and thought through, and less of a problematic disruption and more of a positive evolution. But you do have to have some of that intentionality, that transparency, that communication, that clarity of the why that we've teed up so many times. And Cheryl, you talked about it right at the beginning of this episode. just recognizing that from the beginning. And I think the more that you can allow people to co-create that change with you, it helps bring them on, and Rich, that change curve can be swum through a little bit smoother if people feel like they're already on board with that.
Yep. Sure. And my takeaway that ties into that, Ben, is that training, for example, there's no reason to wait until, the town hall happens or the PDF drops or the thing is unveiled. Keep your people in the loop early. Start training early. Have the conversations so it's not such a big, blooming, drastic kind of thing. But as human beings, it is instinctual to fear the things that are unfamiliar to us. It keeps us alive, and so that is hardwired. So, providing training early in those conversations can keep that fear response from kicking in the best case scenario.
Sure. And for me, I like what you brought up, Cheryl, about having that support of other people. That social element of having this this pit or this guiding coalition or whatever you want to call it, right? These you need to have other advocates within the culture or within the change, to make that culture stick. So it's a culture of one or a culture of a couple is not going to be sustainable as much as when you have a group of people that have those those same assumptions, values, and the subsequent artifacts demonstrating all those espoused assumptions.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, thank you all for joining us today on our. We're at 27 episodes.
27. Yeah.
Right on. Thank you all for joining us. Ben, you're up on taking us out today.
Which is so sad because I don't have my luck today.
Oh, that's okay. We'll raise a glass for you.
But until next time, make change your friend.
Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network. And remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.